Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. We were talking about last time being found in the condition of yet without strength. And we're talking about that word yet in that it is pointing us toward the extreme condition of being without strength. Now, by the way, that being extremely to the maximum amount without strength should not surprise us, because actually earlier in the book of Romans we covered some verses that talked about this very thing. Let me take you back there so that you can see that right after we do these bullets. Why am I doing that? Why are those here? I guess I have something on the PowerPoint. I did put this on the PowerPoint because I thought, I need you to see it, so we'll just do it and then we'll run that reference. That the issues are Christ died for us. Remember I said this at the last session. He didn't just die for us, that's not what the verse is saying, but He died for us in view of a particular condition being the case with us, which is the issue of us being without strength. And He died at a particular time, which is the issue of in due time. So His death is with those two things in mind. Okay, now that ought to kind of catch us back up to where we were. And then we came to Romans 5:6. We were yet without strength. Now, Romans 3:9. Here we are. What then? Are we better than they? No, in no wise, for we have before proved, both Jews and Gentiles, they are all under sin. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none that understandeth. There is none that seeketh after God. They are all gone out of the way. They are together become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. Their throat is an open sepulchre, and with their tongues they have used deceit. The poison of asps is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their ways. The way of peace have they not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Now, let me back you up just a little bit. You see these 6 areas that I highlighted here? None righteous, none that understandeth, none that seeketh after God, gone out of the way, become unprofitable, none that doeth good. That isn't just a list. Again, it's not harem-scarum. It's not just a list. God didn't just say, they just this, like it's coming into His mind and He's just saying it. Those are actually 6 opportunities that God gave to Gentiles. He had given them something that was supposed to produce something in them, and He gave them, during a period of time, He gave them 6 opportunities to do that they would respond in different ways. And what He found is that there was none righteous, and then He found that there was none that understood, and then He found that there was none that would seek after God. He found that they were gone out of the way because He'd given them away, and they went out of that way. They had become unprofitable, and that there was none that doeth good. Those things are very specific. Now, I don't want to go back and teach those things because that'll really get us off track. But what I do want to do is take you back to this part, because that in Romans 3, now again, we mentioned this a little bit last time, is a quote from Psalm 14 and Psalm 53. You remember when we were in those last time? Okay. And those Psalms are spotlighting the iniquity of the Gentiles. Now, in Romans, he's going to tie that in with the iniquity of the Jews, and he's going to conclude both Jews and Gentiles, they are what? All under sin. Remember, he's going to tie it all together. But in Psalm 14 and Psalm 53, he's really focusing on the iniquity of the Gentiles. Psalm 14:1. Let me get to it. The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good. Didn't we just read that over there in Romans 3? We did. Now I highlighted all of verse 2 for you. The Lord looked down from heaven upon the children of men. That children of men is a reference to whom? Thank you, Gentiles. To see if there were any that did understand and seek God. Do you see that? Hold that in your memory. I'm going to back up. To see if He looked down from heaven upon those Gentiles to see if there were any that did understand and seek after God. Look back in Romans 3. There is none that understandeth, there is none that seeketh after God. Paul is recounting back what was done when God gave these Gentiles something that was supposed to make them understand something about God and do something which he was going to call seek after him. Now, it doesn't matter for the sake of this session how you define that. But at least, and you know this has to be the least, seeking after God means to at least understand he's out there. God consciousness. In other words, consciousness that of the true God. Not conscious that there is a God, because that might be a stone image, or the sun, or the stars, or the moon. But he is talking about seeking after the true God. And so at least what God was giving these Gentiles was enough for them to be able to see the true God exist. Now, if that's what he's talking about seek God, it doesn't matter to me. If you think, well, that's all it is, it doesn't matter. The point is, there is something that God is expecting from them that would be causing them to understand and to seek after him. Okay? How you define that's irrelevant. Now, the reason that I'm saying that to you is because, well, let's go back to the Psalm 14. Verse 2, so the Lord looked down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there were any that did understand and seek after God. They are all gone aside. Remember what Romans said? They are gone out of the way. Remember that? There was a way they were supposed to follow. They went out of the way. As a matter of fact, there's another way that God gave them, and it said they turned back. They're all turned back. In other words, they were not going in the direction they were supposed to go. They're altogether become filthy. There is, here's that quote again, there is none that doeth good, no, not one. Have all the workers of iniquity no knowledge, who eat up my people as they eat bread and call not upon the Lord? By the way, when did the Gentiles eat up God's people as though they were eating bread? Okay, that fifth cycle of punishment that kicked off at the Babylonian captivity. Now you have a good idea of when that period of time started, where God actually looked down on those Gentiles and gave them something that was supposed to produce an understanding that would cause them to seek after God. And he said, and when that period of time was up, the Lord looked down, and how many did he find that did that? None. Do you ever ask yourself, now I'm telling you the story, and what I don't want you to have in your mind is, that's just the story of what happened. I mean, it is the story of what happened. That didn't explain right, did it? Okay, let me try that again. I don't want you to just see that that's just what happened to work out. God, because of what he was planning, had to give them that thing he gave them that would cause them to understand and seek after him. And when they didn't, he had to make a declaration that there were how many? None. And then he has to describe their condition. And when he describes their condition, would you agree with me that he is using terms that describe them in their extreme condition of not doing what they're supposed to do? Would you agree? I mean, that's pretty strong terminology. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. They are all turned aside. Their mouth is an open sepulchre. I mean, he is using all of this extreme. That's exactly the way your Father wants you to see this, in the extreme. And he needed to say it that way, because there was something he was doing back there that when you understand what he was doing back there, you are now going to have groundwork to understand what Paul is explaining to you and me in Romans 5:6. When we were yet, in that extreme sense, without strength, we are declared to be. They were declared to be something, and we are declared to be something. And those are all in the extreme condition that we find them. Now, let's see. So let's do this. I have a little timeline here. God consigned the Gentiles at the Tower of Babel over to the adversary, right? Now that he's consigned the Gentiles over to the adversary, what's the next thing he does? Generally speaking on the timeline. Okay, calls out Abraham. And why does he call out Abraham? Okay, so he calls out Abram. He's going to make a new nation. That nation is... Okay, so he's going to formulate Israel, and he does that. Remember, he gives him a son in his old age, and then Jacob's born because the father of the 12 tribes, and so you have Israel. Israel comes along now. Do they do everything they're supposed to do? No. They also, in the midst of this program with Israel, though, God finally, in the 5th cycle, spews them out of the land. Remember, things got worse and worse and worse. Remember Israel's prophetic history? Israel's... God's plan and program with Israel. Remember when we did that? It got worse and worse and worse and worse until finally he spews them out of the land. And when he does, he then gives... He doesn't bring in a dispensation of Gentile grace, but he does give Gentiles something that is supposed to make them do two things: understand and seek him. Right? And then, after he does that, he looks down from heaven to see who has done that. Now, there wasn't anybody. They were totally without representation in those areas whatsoever. Now, I need to keep reading the rest of this psalm, and then we're going to bring this together with us, because this is what this psalm is talking about. Remember, take you back, verse 2. There's him looking down from heaven to see if any did understand and seek him. They're all gone aside. Verse 4, have all the workers of iniquity no knowledge? They eat up my people as they eat bread and call not upon the Lord. They were in great fear, for God is in the generation of the righteous. You have shamed the counsel of the poor, because the Lord is in his refuge. Oh, that the salvation of Israel will come out of Zion. When the Lord bringeth back the captive of his people, Jacob shall rejoice, and Israel shall be glad. Now, whenever we talk about God found there is none that seeketh after God, no, not one. When he said that, I want to warn you to be aware of Calvinistic doctrine right here. I don't want to confuse you with it. If you say, I don't even know what Calvinistic doctrine is, good for you. For those of you that have heard that and been confused by that, Calvinistic doctrine is a five-fold, you can use the acronym TULIP to talk about the 5 points of Calvinism. And one of those points of Calvinism, the first one is total depravity. And you say, well, we are depraved. We can't save ourselves. But when the Calvinist says total depravity, that's not what he means. Total depravity for a Calvinist includes this. It includes you not only cannot be saved on your own, you can't even want to be saved on your own. You are totally dead to that whole process. You can't even desire to know the true God on your own. That's what that total depravity is about. So they would say, when God says there's none that seeketh after God, there's none that understand, they say, see, that proves our point. Man can't seek after God. No, not one. And that's the verse they use to prove that. But that verse is not talking about mankind in general. It's talking about something that was offered to the Gentiles under the 5th cycle of punishment that was supposed to, even though Gentiles have been consigned over to the adversary back here, it did provide an opportunity for Gentiles to be aware of Him and to seek Him. He didn't do it because He knew they couldn't. How many of you take your kids out in the backyard and go, okay, jump on the roof. Jump on the roof. Jump on the roof. And they can't. And you go, well, okay, we'll try again tomorrow. And you go in and you go, they'll never do it. You don't take them out to do stuff they can't do. God wasn't doing something they couldn't do, because the seeking that the Calvinist talks about is not, when God says there's none that seeketh after God, there's none that understand. He's not talking about what the Calvinist talks about. He is talking about Gentiles in Israel's program that were given a way and given light so that they would be able to, in some degree, understand and seek after God. By the way, since we're on that, it's not in the PowerPoint. I didn't want this to become a separate discussion. You got your Bibles, turn to Acts 17. Let me just show you this. And it's not, I guess I should have put it in the PowerPoint. At one time I had it in there and I thought I'm not going to do that because that's not, I don't want to get off track on this thing. But since I've kind of opened up this can of worms, I want to put the lid back on it. Paul in Acts chapter 17, I'm in John, Acts chapter 17, look at verse 16. Now while Paul waited for them at Athens, the Spirit was stirred in him, and he saw the city wholly given to idolatry. And they did. They had idols everywhere. And it says, verse 22, Then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, Ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things ye are too superstitious. For as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription, To the unknown God. In other words, they were so afraid they might have left. They had so many gods, but they were afraid they still might have missed one. So they made an altar to the unknown God. Just in case we missed you and you're the one, we've got you an altar too. Okay. Whom therefore ye ignorantly worship, him declare I unto you. God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands, neither is worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, seeing he giveth to all life and breath and all things, and hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation. Why did he do that? Verse 27, that they should what? So I guess men can seek the Lord, can't they? God said they could. So when the Calvinist says, well, you're total depravity, you can't seek God because, well, you know what? Don't call God a liar. Because it says that they could. Let's just keep reading the verse there. What verse were we at, by the way? Okay. That they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as certain also of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. He said, your own poets said, we're his offspring. And by the way, to say that we're the offspring of the true God is a long ways from idolatry. Yes? Did they understand something about God? Those poets I'm talking about. Did they? And when they made that statement, do you think they not only had sought, but maybe they had found the Lord? Now, I'm not saying to what degree they understood everything. I'm saying they were not so depraved that they were wandering around not knowing anything about the true God. Paul said they did, not only that they might seek him, but haply they might find him. That's all I'm going to say about that, because now you can take all that Calvinism claptrap and throw it in the garbage where it belongs. Sorry, put my glasses on. I don't need them. All right. That's nothing more than aiding the policy of evil to make you uncertain about things. I'm not saying the men that do that are willing servants of the devil. I'm just saying unwittingly and well-meaningly cooperating with the policy of evil. You need to recognize it for what it is. And don't sugarcoat it. Well, I mean, I know they're teaching a lie, but I mean, they're really sincere. Okay. Well, I went hunting, I shot you in the leg, but, you know, I didn't mean to, but I was sincere. Well, that'll make you feel better. Okay. So, all right, we had that timeline. We read Psalm 14. In Romans 6, now, you understand that in Psalm 14 and Psalm 53, that has to do with God saying, I gave them something that would cause them to understand and seek after me. I looked down from heaven to see who had done that. I didn't find anyone that had done that. When you get back over to Romans, remember Paul rehearses all that in chapter 3. There's none that doeth good, no, not one. There's none that understand. There's none that seek after God. They're all turned aside. They're all gone out of the way. There's none that doeth good. No. Remember, he's rehearsing all of that to them. And why in the world would Paul bring that up in Romans 3? Which, by the way, is the answer to the question is, why in the world am I bringing it up now? Because Paul brought it up. And because he brings it up. What I'm going to show you is that Christ died for the ungodly in connection with that. That's exactly what everything is pointing to. And what I'm trying to say is, Christ didn't just die for sinners. He died for sinners who were to the extreme extent without strength. Now that means, and that, by the way, is important to understand in the promise of being delivered from the day of wrath. Don't forget where we are with all of this. So the question is now, if he says, okay, he didn't just die for sinners, but he died for sinners who were in the most extreme case of being without strength, the question is what? Thank you! What is without strength? What does that mean? And that's exactly what we want to look at. Because, by the way, that's going to be found back in Romans chapter 3 again, because that's where he's discussing all of that, in verses 21 to 26. And I don't think I have this on PowerPoint, so let me just look. Oh, here we go. I do have this on PowerPoint. Okay. Romans 3:10 to 12 is the issue of Gentile iniquity. Verses 13 to 18 is the issue of Jewish iniquity. Verses 19 to 20 was the final conclusion. What was the final conclusion? Everybody's understand, doesn't matter who you are. And then 21 to 26 is the good news of God's spelled out message of what he did about our extreme condition in which we were destitute of possessing ample resources of action, which is our being yet without strength. Now if that sounds complex to you, can I boil that down for you in a sentence? What you're going to see is that when God looked down from heaven and he saw all that opportunity, by the way, that thing runs all the way through the earthly ministry of Jesus. That thing also runs through the extension of mercy all the way up until now. When God looks down and says, it's not happening, then the next thing on the calendar, as far as anybody knows, is the day of wrath. That's the thing we're talking about being promised a deliverance from, right? Okay, so this is pertinent. That whole period runs in there. Here's what's happening. At the end, when God looks down from heaven upon the children of men and he sees how all that went, he says this: you're all to the extreme, yet to the extreme extent, without strength. That yet without strength is because we're still in Romans 5 in a courtroom setting. Legal terminology, evidence being presented, and the judge of everyone passing down judgment one way or another, guilty or not. That is a judicial declaration that God looks at you and says, because of the condition that you're in, you have no strength. Is it physical strength? Is that what he's talking about? Let me just like this. Is he talking about physical strength? No. You're not talking about physical strength. He is talking about strength with regard to the position that you find yourself in as you are guilty before God. And you are totally without strength. There's nothing. It's like a guy that he invested all of it. He borrowed, he got investors, he put all his eggs in this basket, and it all went under, and now he's in court, and the court is saying, how much do you have to pay all this back? And when he does this, Your Honor will pay no attention to that change on the floor. I forgot I had that in my pocket. Great. My wife, her eyes went. She collects all the change. You'd be amazed how much she, we have to put it on the trailer to haul it to the bank. Anyway, I wish. Now y'all made me forget what I was saying. How much do you have to repay all that? And we just turn our pockets inside out and we go, I have absolutely nothing. I have nothing. Your Heavenly Father, in fact, you have to be in that condition. You have to be in that condition. Because if you're in the condition and go, well, I could kind of scrape it together, you will now not be proclaimed to be yet without strength. And let me go ahead and underline this, because this is the second part of this first thing. It all goes together. You need to be declared yet without strength. That is a judicial declaration that says you are totally destitute, bankrupt, unable. That's why the yet is there. You have gotten to the most extreme position you can get to, and there's nothing you can do to remedy it. Because in Oriental law, not Western law, not the way we do it. I think there are actually some areas of law in our law system in which you can do this, but it's limited. But in Occidental Eastern law, here's what they do. This is what the Bible would be familiar with. It is at that point when a judge declares a guy to be totally without strength, he can now ask this question: is there anyone who would like to function as a redeemer for the defendant? Only a guy in that condition can the court do that for him. And the court will then say, is there anyone here that wants to function as a redeemer? Which means you're going to take over the entire debt. And you not only are you will do it, you are doing it of your own free will. And you have the ability to totally liquidate the debt without doing damage to yourself. Only then do you qualify to be a redeemer. And the judge will, and if no one says, I'm not taking over that debt, then that guy's in trouble. But here's the point that Paul's going to make. You're before God's court, and He has declared you to be now to the extreme extent without strength. And then because he looked at, by the way, there's reason for the timeline. You know what he's doing here? When he gave them this opportunity right here, it was to prove, when he looked down, that they are, with all that extreme terminology, they are yet without strength. That they, and Paul, that's why he pipes all that back in over to Romans 3 and talks about how destitute they were. And he uses all that extreme language. describe their condition, and he even says, no, not one. No, not one. He keeps hammering that home because God knew he didn't tell anybody, but he knew that there was coming a time in which he was going to do something with Gentiles. Now, by the way, God would have done that with the Gentiles back here, whether there had ever been a dispensation of Gentile grace or not. That has no bearing on it. Now, I don't want you to get that confused, but the thing I want you to see is that when God looked down and he said that about them, that's the reason Paul uses this. He says, you know the condition that God found them in? That's the condition you are now found in. And he describes that as being yet without strength. And that means that now, and only now, that official declaration has been made by the court, that God will now say, is there a redeemer for the defendant? And you already know the answer to that. That's when Jesus Christ says, I'll redeem them. I'll redeem them. I not only will do it, I want to do it of my own free will. And I have more than ample resources to redeem every bit of it. And the judge will look at him and say, on what basis, I'm going to jump you ahead here a little bit, on what basis are you going to redeem them? And you know what he's going to say? Not because there's anything good about them or because I think I'm going to get my payment back in the future, but simply on the basis of this: I love them. And when you begin to see that whole judicial thing functioning solely on the basis of God's love, when you really get that firm in your mind and then it's in your heart, guess what's happening? The love of God is getting shed abroad in your heart, and that is going to become the operating principle by which you will meet every attack against your hope. Now, we're not there yet. All we've really done is cover one half of verse 6. We still got to do the rest of verse 6 and verse 7 and verse 8 before I can really get you there. But I needed you to know that light at the end of the tunnel was not another train. It is actually the good news that there is something out there for us to look at and say, see, because who wants to say, I'm just totally undone? And the court has to say that. And when God says you are yet without, so Christ died, he didn't just die for sinners, but because we are declared yet without, when we were declared to be yet without strength, when we were at the required, appropriate, what was the word you told me at the break? Allotted, appointed, right time. You know why? Because in the legal system, when a redeemer was asked for, there was a specific window of time that the redeemer had to perform the redemption. And it had to be performed within that window. He couldn't just say, Your Honor, you know what? If you've been watching on TV, those guys digging for gold, that's my guys up there, and when we strike it, I'll redeem all of his debt. The judge is not going to say, well, we're not waiting. He's not going to say, we'll wait on that. He's not waiting on that. That redemption is going to be performed at all of this is specific. All of this is just, folks, it's just like I'm sitting in the defendant's box and I've been shown to be absolutely, utterly, 100% without strength at all. And the court has now declared it openly. And about the time I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, I'm completely undone here, the judge will then say, and in view of the extreme bankruptcy of the defendant, is there anyone who now wishes to function as his redeemer? And I can look across that courtroom and see Jesus Christ stand up and say, I'll redeem it all. Man, when he does that, He is redeeming something. Now listen, I'm jumping you ahead again. He's not just wiping out my debt, but in that redemption process, He is making sure that I understand I am never going to go through the consequences of my debt. True? And He's saying to you, and because of that, you're never going to go through the day of wrath. He's going to cancel all that out. That's not what's going to happen for you. And when you see how that works, suddenly, because I know when you just read Romans 5:6, you just look at that and you go like, I don't see all that there. But when you understand what this phrase is, now when you understand what that is, He's not just saying, we always have been sinners, we always will be sinners. He's talking about we're a particular kind of sinner. We find ourselves in a totally bankrupt condition of which there is no future hope of anything being changed with regard to that. It's not just that we are still bankrupt. It's that we are bankrupt to the absolute greatest extent, and God has given, because you, okay, see, in every one of those trials, the defendant is given an opportunity to exonerate himself. It doesn't mean he's not guilty of the charges against him, but what he gets to do, look, when a defendant goes through a trial and he's found guilty, you know what the next thing is? It comes to the sentencing. And before the sentencing, you know what he does? Is the lawyer calls up every friend he's got. And they sit up there and testify what a good guy he is. And all that has to do with is the sentencing. It's not, is he guilty or not? It's that the court, when they get ready to sentence him, should look on him favorably. Does that make sense? Have you ever seen that before? You watch TV. Okay. And they would look and say, Your Honor, he's never been in trouble before. Look, he's respected in his community, and he's well respected in the business world, and here's the people that he worked with, and I'll go, he's a wonderful guy, and his neighbors testify and say, he's a great dad, and another guy says, he loaned us money when we were just destitute. We're so grateful. And they tell all these good things about him in hopes that when it comes to sentencing him, instead of giving him the maximum, the judge might look at him and go, everybody makes mistakes. Here's what we're going to do for you. And he's going to get off lighter. See, it's the sentencing part. But here's what happened. God looked at us to see, is there anything that could exonerate us? That's what he was doing with the Gentiles. He was giving them a chance to exonerate themselves. I gave you a way so that you would understand and seek after me. But what was the end result? Nothing. And Paul says, and now God is looking at you. And He's saying, is there anything you can do now that will make your sentence different? Can you produce anything that will change that? Can you exonerate yourself to any degree? And here's what the court decided at the end. You haven't given us anything to show that anything else ought to be done for you. You haven't produced anything. In fact, we kind of don't like you worse now than we did before. And when you're in that position, the court then declares you to be yet without strength. You are totally, to the fullest extent possible, not worthy of any kind of reduction of sentence. But thank God that's where we are. You say, why would God even do that? Because that has to be established before a Redeemer can ever even enter the picture. Because if you have a way of doing it yourself, the court will never ask for a redeemer. So when we get declared yet without strength, God is saying, I looked over this thing to see if you could exonerate yourself to any degree, and because works are allowed, you don't have anything. You have nothing. And then after he talks about how bad we are, and we're thinking, oh, they're going to put me under the jail before they execute me. Then he asks, is there a redeemer? Because that's the only way you get a redeemer. Thank God for that. Thank God for that. Because in our worst condition, God says, you know what? You had to get there so you could get out. It's the only way out. It's for someone else to bear the entire burden for you. And you understand it had to happen that way. It had not only had to happen just that way, you had to have this pronounced against you, just like they did. You had to have this pronounced against you, but Christ had to redeem at the required time so that everything would work exactly how it was supposed to work. Now, what we haven't done is we really haven't talked about in due time very much. We've mentioned it. I think you have an idea of it, but we haven't talked about it very much. So let me just give you this last one, because I'm going to take you back, I think, to Romans 3:24. Yeah, it'll be the last verse we do here in this session. Because after he tells us about, remember, in verses 21, 26, it was the good news of the gospel, remember? After he says, here's the Gentiles, you're undone. Here's the Jews, you're undone. Here's the conclusion, you're all undone. And he said, but here's the good news of the gospel. And look at verse 24, tucked right in the middle of that stuff about none that doeth good. Being justified freely by his grace. How? Through the redemption that's in Christ Jesus. The reason he talked about that Psalm 14 and Psalm 53 thing, and he looked down from heaven and he found it, and there wasn't anybody. He had to do that so that redemption could be offered. That had to be done. And so then the redemption, and you wait, and you're coming all through that fifth cycle of judgment, and things are happening, and the days of the Messiah. But believe me, at exactly the required time, the Redeemer steps forward and provides the perfect redemption. Now, let me tell you this as the last thing we'll do in this session. Everybody in the Old Testament coming up to this understood that there was something happening for Israel. What no one understood when he went to the cross, because even after the cross, it was still Israel in that extension of mercy. Remember, Peter still didn't, even as far as Acts 10, he still had problems about Gentiles and that kind of issue. Back here as Jesus goes to the cross, the only thing anybody knows is that there is something being done for Israel here. But what God had kept a secret in his own heart was that there was something very specific being accomplished in the redemptive death of Jesus Christ on the cross for Gentiles. Only no one knew about it, and that's the message Paul is preaching. That's why it's so different. Because now, that which was done, but not known except to God, is now going to be revealed by Paul in this dispensation of grace to say, when Jesus went back there on the cross. That's why he's doing all of this. That's why he's giving you this terminology. That's why he's saying that we were yet without strength. That's why he's saying in due time Christ died. That's why he's doing all that, is to say to you, not that you need to be saved, you're already saved, but to show you there is an attack now that's going to come against and rob you of the assurances that you have in your salvation. And what I need you to know is how sure that got done, so that no one can ever come back and say, you violated the process, you broke the law, you did this illegally, this was done wrong, you made the wrong step. It's like you didn't tag first on your way around. No one's ever going to come back and do that. What they're going to do is they're going to look at that and they're going to go, God crossed every T, He dotted every I, and He made a promise that you're not going to go through the day of wrath and you're not going to the lake of fire. And He's going to say, and I did it not because of anything you deserve, but because I loved you. And you can count on that. In fact, He's saying, take it to the bank. And by the time we do the rest of 6 and 7 and 8, that is going to be so firm in your heart. What I'm hoping is those words will effectually work in your heart to produce the assurance that whenever you hear anyone say, well, you can't be sure you're saved, or you guys are going through the tribulation, kidding yourself. There is a doctrine that will immediately come to your mind. You'll understand the whole process that took place to keep that very thing from happening. And you're going to say, that's a lie, and I know why it's a lie. Because in Romans chapter 5, verses 5 through 10, I have been given an absolute, rock-solid guarantee from my Heavenly Father that what He promised me is exactly what He accomplished. And that's why you'll never doubt that again. You'll never fight that battle again. And this is exactly where He wants to go in this. Now, I know we've trudged through this verse slowly. I know. We did half of verse 6 today. I get it. But you need to understand, if I run through this and half of you are going, I don't get it, when the attack comes to you again, you'll be going, well, I'm not sure. And now you've come to a halt. What your Heavenly Father is doing here is He is taking exactly what was in His heart to do and why He thought about it that way, and He is putting it in your thinking so you not only think about it the way He thinks about it, this is the most important part, but that you become fully persuaded beyond any shadow of a doubt that what He promised you is true. That's what He's after. And when you have that working in you, it's not magic, but that word will be effectually working to produce the confidence that it's supposed to produce. That's exactly what those, and that's why that precise terminology is important, because that's the words that are supposed to produce that. So I'm kind of marking time going through this thing because I need us all to take this journey. This is important. By the way, I'll tell you this. After He does this and He defines this and then He gives us the guarantee, the last 2 verses give us the 2, I call them the super proofs. That that not only will you never go into the day of wrath, God couldn't put you there if He wanted to. He has made it so it is to the extreme extent in which you were without strength, you are now in the extreme condition of never going into the day of wrath. It's just without any possibility of change. It's not that you're still not going in. He's saying there's not a condition available in the universe that would enable you to go in. I mean, it's just great stuff, isn't it? Now, why is God going to all the trouble to do that for you? Well, first of all, because your justified life is the first of 2 components of spiritual fitness that you have to have. You have to have that in place in order for you to really live as a son or daughter of God by the time we get over to Romans 8. 2 components of spiritual fitness: perfect justification, perfect sanctification. He's nailing down your perfect justification. You realize we're getting close, don't you? We're in 5, 3 chapters away, and it's like we're going to all climb on a spaceship and jet off into the creature.